Welcome to Doctors at Work. My name is Matt Daniel, and this podcast is about doctors' careers. Today's topic is how senior doctors can support those that are early in their career. And being an early career doctor is undoubtedly a stressful time. And how our medical work is structured may mean that there are few opportunities for senior doctors to support the younger colleagues. Ollie Burton and I discuss how, despite workload challenges, senior doctors can seek and create opportunities to support and train younger colleagues. And that requires clinical leadership and a real understanding that training must be prioritised in order to develop, support and train future clinicians. Welcome, Ollie. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Matt. Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Ollie. As you know, I am an early career or a junior doctor, currently working in neurosurgery as a clinical research fellow. I was a graduate entry to medicine, so I did a degree in molecular biology before then doing an accelerated medical course. I went to work in Newcastle for a couple of years for my foundation training, and then have worked my way down to London. So alongside my clinical work in neurosurgery, I do plenty of research here and there, and I do a lot of content creation, and that's the other thing that keeps me busy, sort of making videos for patients and the public and for students to try and help them grasp medicine and how it works.
And the topic for us today is how senior doctors can support early career doctors. And maybe I can start by asking what kind of support do early career doctors need?
Sure. So in a relentlessly kind of tick boxy way, I would separate these down into the types of domains that you're trained to discuss at interview, these different aspects of your life, the sort of clinical, academic, managerial, personal aspects. So clinically, obviously, we rely on senior doctors for our training, or the bulk thereof. If I want to become a surgeon or a radiologist or whatever you like, UK training typically works in this apprenticeship-based model, and that relies on a very strong relationship between a senior doctor and a more early careers doctor in order to work at all. And when it doesn't work, it can have devastating consequences for not only for someone's training, but for someone's career as a whole. Same story with academia. You will find yourself absolutely stuck very quickly if you are trying to engage in projects without the appropriate senior support that you need. And speaking as an early careers researcher myself, my toolbox of things I can do by myself is much larger than it was, for example, when I was a student, but I'm nowhere near being able to lead a clinical trial or even, a multi-center cohort study or these kinds of clinically impactful studies. So I've still got a long way to go. I would be very reliant on my senior doctors to help me figure that out. Personal, we could go to next. Obviously, many people have issues at home or at work, or things maybe not going how they planned, or stresses that they weren't expecting. And I think if you have a senior that is understanding and supportive and tries to empathize with you and help you as much as they can, that obviously makes a huge difference for someone's well-being and just feeling that they're listened to. And then I've swapped my order around, but managerial and leadership elements as well, where you need strong role models, depending on the model of leadership to which you hold yourself. But normally we rely on these inspiring leadership figures and looking at someone and going, I want to be like them. I want to be like them when I grow up and be a good leader like them. So I think if you can see among the senior doctors that you work for, if you can see a strong leadership figure and identify them as a role model and someone you want to be like, and you take that forward into your own leadership kind of engagements, then you'll be a much better leader for it.
I'm interested in this idea of both apprenticeship and role modeling. And I think one of the things that comes up in some of my discussions with doctors is that people say, people at your stage will say, I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. They say, I work and I work and I work. and and what's the end of it, and they don't see necessarily something that is worthwhile. They don't see people that are thriving, people that are happy, and that makes it very difficult, because if you say, okay, I'm going to really work hard for the next 10 years, and
Mm.
then, at the end, this is what my life is going to be like as a GP/consultant, whatever it might be. But people are not necessarily seeing that. So how important is it for senior doctors to showcase a successful, happy, thriving career?
I think for exactly the reason that you've outlined, it is very important. People do need that sense of hope. They need something to look forward to and to work towards. But respectfully, I would separate this idea. I think you can be a very successful senior doctor, so a GP or a consultant, but you could also at the same time be someone who people don't want to be like, right? You could be the world's best transplant surgeon. You could be, incredibly technically skilled and saving lives, but you do nothing but work. You are always at work. You never see your family. You never do anything else. And that's how you got as good as you are. And obviously that makes you very successful at what you do. But people they might not want to live like that. They might not want to be like that. And so I guess I would separate the the technical domain and the technical success from the life, as it were, what people are actually doing, and whether they are happy or unhappy. Because again, you could be the best surgeon in the world, but you could be deeply miserable. And I guess particularly now, with the changing landscape of pay and conditions and relationships with other staff members and things, all of these things are, I suppose, discrete entities where someone might come and watch Matt Daniel operate and say, Matt's the best surgeon in the world, and I want to be as good a surgeon as him, but I don't want to work as much as he does, or etc. And I suppose they're different things to consider would be my answer.
How do early career doctors make those decisions about the relative importance of different aspects of life balance? How much do I want to work? How much do I want to train? Where do I want to end up? Family. So how do people
Mm.
make those decisions and balance it all up?
For me, certainly, and I can't speak for my colleagues, but for me, it just comes from speaking to people, and I think I work in neurosurgery, for example, which is a peculiar specialty in and of its own, and people work very long hours. It's a very consuming specialty. And so I suppose having a safe environment where someone like me or even a medical student, earlier on can say, Mr. So-and-so, Miss So-and-so, how you have kids, how do you balance all of these things? Because clearly you're spinning a lot of plates all at once. And when you do ask, you tend to get some really good answers. But I think if they don't feel safe to ask these kinds of questions, or say you wanted to raise something like the possibility of working less than full time, or something in a surgical specialty, which might be an anathema in some specialties at the moment, or this horrific thing, you need that confidence that asking these questions is not going to destroy your career before it starts. So I guess there's what you can glean from asking directly and getting an honest answer. There's what you can observe, and I think even as a student, you can quite astutely observe who is happy and who is not. You can see that just from how people project and how they relate to others, perhaps in their department. Dysfunctional units exist, sadly, in all specialties, and even walking through them as a medical student, it's quite easy to tell where people are happy and where they're not. So that might influence your view of these things. I've been lucky, I suppose, in the sense that in many of my specialty experiences, senior doctors have been very keen to, so you're going to come and do a career in anesthetics, you're going to come and be an intensive care doctor, right? They sell their specialty because they love it. And I suppose that's the other side of all of this. My angle's been somewhat negative thus far, but just as you have that, you have people that love what they do all day, every day, and they're the happiest people in the world, and they want everyone else to do it and see how good it is.
What makes one specialty? Is this specialty, are some specialties just happier than others? And and if so, what makes people in specialty happy? Or is it departments, that some departments are happier than others? What makes one department happy and another one not?
That's really interesting because I think, and I realize as I'm formulating this, I have no evidence for this. So this is just this is me pontificating a little bit, but you would think that specialties perhaps with higher on-call burden, higher acuity in presentation, where you're doing more resident on-calls, perhaps long into your career, perhaps training is long, multiple fellowships, no prospects of a consultant job at the end, and obviously I'm talking about neurosurgery there. I can very well imagine that kind of situation would make someone more miserable than if they didn't have to face those same barriers. But what I want to be very careful not to do is to pinhole this idea that negative experience necessarily means that someone is going to feel negatively about their specialty, because despite all of those hardships, someone may love it. And a specialty that doesn't have those things, perhaps you see CT quicker and there's very little on call and you can work from home, or all of these things that might make your life easier and more flexible, you can still have a horrible time depending on the circumstances. So I guess there are broad scale issues that will influence your positivity or negativity, and different specialties will have their own challenges. But I think it's probably more about the individual level and individual departments in which people work. Because I think even if you're having a terrible time, if all of you in a department are having a terrible time together and you're working through that adversity together, you might feel okay. But someone who is working in a much shorter specialty, perhaps with less burden like that, but you're not supported, you're alone, you're not being trained properly, you're going to be miserable. So I guess it's an interplay.
It's interesting actually that yeah, there's many things there. So if I think back to my career, because obviously I'm substantially older than you, and I remember when I first started working, the hours and the workloads were terrible, yeah, and people really struggled with that. But what existed was there was real camaraderie. Everybody was in
Yeah.
it together, and everybody did shift works together, and and there was a mess, and we got free accommodation, and and tea and coffee, and if you're on call on Christmas Day, you went from ward to ward, and every ward gave you a Christmas meal, and every ward gave you present, and every patient brought you chocolates, and it was just totally different. So the workload was hard, but the whole support system, the reward, the camaraderie, um, really kind of acted as a counterbalance to that. Yeah. And I think lots of that, I think, has disappeared. I mean, I'm a long
Yeah.
way sort of removed from early career doctors, but I don't think people don't spend a long time in the mess. People don't go out for dinner together. You don't do on calls with your team. You're not all in once every 5 days. The registrar doesn't buy pizza for everybody in the team. Because that whole teamwork and camaraderie has been fractured, and disappeared. And I would love to try and get sort of some of that back. And I think the problem with that is I think the structure of how we work has changed, and probably because us as doctors we gave up the power to structure how we work. Yeah, because if you kind of think that when I was at your stage, the consultant reg, SHO house officer, all of you would be on call together, at the same time. Okay. And that meant that, once every 5, 6 days, whatever it used to be, you were on call together, but you were always on call together. The whole team was together.
Yeah.
Yes, it was hard work, but you always worked with your consultant and your edge, etc. The same team. And obviously that doesn't happen anymore. I wonder, sort of in terms of what you were saying about there's a fit between a specialty and an individual, isn't it? Yeah. And which then goes to I love the high, or not me, but one loves the high acuity sort of stuff, the out of hour stuff, the emergency, sort of the stabbing and the major trauma, and all of that is super exciting and makes you come alive. But it happens to come with resident and weekends, and you say, okay, well, I accept these bits because what I really love is the stabbing and the major trauma. Yeah. Or you might sort of get somebody else who say, actually, I'm really value the fact that sort of that I can do all of these additional things, and and time out and time away from my work, and that's really, really important. And I accept that perhaps my workload is different, or maybe I accept that I have to have 10-minute appointments because I want to have every weekend off, and in order to have every weekend off, I accept that what I have to deal with 10-minute appointment, or whatever happens to be your pain point. But it's people consciously choosing and accepting.
It's, I mean, what I think, and it's something I really don't want to dwell on because it can't ever come back. But what you were talking about is the firm, isn't it? The firm structure, and that's now long dead within UK postgraduate training. But it just made me think. I did my foundation program, and for those who are maybe pre-modernizing medical careers in the foundation program, the way it used to be is you would graduate medical school and do 6 months of medicine, 6 months of surgery, and then those were your house jobs, and then you would apply for a job working in some specialty somewhere or whatever, and start working towards becoming a registrar. Now, the current system that we use is the foundation program, which consists of 6 4-month-long posts over 2 years, and the idea being that you see some medicine, some surgery, some community medicine. But because you're only really there 4 months, obviously is nothing in the grand scheme of things. You're barely getting a taster of a specialty, and you get to grips with one department and how it works and how the consultants work, and then you're ripped away again and put somewhere else. And I went through, I think, my first surgical job, for example, my first job as a surgical house officer. I think I met my consultant maybe twice, in 4 months. And I don't think it came across at the time as in they were disinterested, and I don't think they had any interest in ever meeting us, because our job was kind of to keep the patients alive on the wards, do the bloods, prescribe the meds, write the discharge letters, whatever, try and keep the patients alive while they're doing other things. But as I've now cleared the foundation program and I don't rotate anymore, and we now have foundation doctors who come in and out every 4 months, how are you meant to develop a relationship with someone in that length of time, and particularly a consultant who will see 6 new faces, maybe more, in the space of a couple of years? They're never going to remember these people that float in and out, or be able to substantially invest in them. They could try, and some people might be able to have these transient, very positive experiences, but as you say, I think we've hamstrung ourselves to some degree with how we've allowed things to change, and we've set up a situation for our newly graduating doctors in which they're not going to be invested in, they're not going to be remembered, they're flung from pillar to post to keep services running, and that's the point, rather than educational benefit. And the bigger question for me is how we would ever undo that, if it's possible. But yeah, I think we we are as much to blame as a profession for allowing these changes to happen, I think.
So I think you've already identified at least two things there for me that can be done, and the first one is that how the impression that the consultant will give, to an early career doctor. And I'm not suggesting that I'm brilliant at this because I'm not. And again, if I think people come through to us and I see them and if I'm somebody's clinical supervisor, I see them, for the sign-in meeting, and I say, you've got to come and do at least one clinic with me so that at least I've met you once.
Yeah.
And literally that is the only contact that we have, the sign-in meeting, one clinic, and the sign-out meeting. And that's the only contact that I have with somebody that I've supervised for 4 months. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's actually, that's not that I'm disinterested in them. Yeah.
No.
So, but it's that's how the work is structured. Their work is structured away from me. So for me, that's the problem, is how the work is structured. Yeah. They are not aligned to me, and their work and my work are not structured together. There's the problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what needs to be fixed is, it needs to be fixed so that when I'm in clinic, when I'm doing my clinic, the SHO does the emergency clinic. Yeah. So if I'm doing my clinic on a Thursday morning, the SHO does their emergency clinic on a Thursday morning, which means that both of us are, together there, or that kind of is an example of something that potentially could be done. But I suppose
Yeah.
there's an attitude there, which is, you've said, how interested the senior doctor is, and maybe what we as senior doctors can do, we can acknowledge that this is a system, and it's not that I'm disinterested in you. The reality is that in 4 months' time, we'll be lucky to do one clinic together. Yeah, because that is how the system is. Yeah. And that's terrible supervision, but it is how the system is, at least.
Yeah.
And I suspect elsewhere also. But maybe the consultant can acknowledge that, and recognize that. Hopefully there'll be areas. Maybe this is particularly bad in surgery, so hopefully there'll be areas where it is much better. And then as people rotate through, then cherish the times when you do actually get to spend time with your supervisor, because certainly in a lot of surgical specialties it just doesn't happen. So when people rotate through other areas, when you do actually get to spend time in your supervisor, and that's something to be cherished. But the two sort of things for me there would be, one that we can fix is, how is work structured, and two, how are we welcoming as consultants? How do we welcome people into our department? And perhaps three is, the reality is that again, if I think of surgical world, I know the registrar that I'm working with very well, because the registrar and I are always together. Yeah, the registrar and I are a team. The SHO and I are not a team. Yeah. But perhaps is, if I give a really good experience to the registrar, and if I support the registrar really well, hopefully the registrar, who does work with the SHOs much more than I do, hopefully if the registrar is well supported, the registrar will support the SHO. So maybe what can be done is, the days when I will spend lots of time with the SHO, difficult to see how that's going to change anytime soon. But if I treat the registrar well, then hopefully that registrar will provide a really good experience to the SHO. So maybe is that trickle down caring, let's call it that.
Maybe, and I think genuinely, Matt, that the feeling on the ground, and this is speaking, so I'm an SHO in a surgical specialty, but the feeling generally is your training as such, your proper training in medicine or surgery across specialties does not really begin until you are a registrar, for that exact reason, because until that point, you have nobody that is actually invested in your training, because it doesn't matter. That's the thing. If you have an FY1 doctor, a new graduate who comes to you in ENT perhaps, and they maybe learn a bit of ENT, they maybe don't, whatever, they probably statistically don't want to do ENT, because that would only be one specialty out of many. They move on, and so what? It doesn't really matter to you, no, not you personally, but your department or the system as a whole, whether that doctor is any good at ENT or not after they come out. Similar with any other rotation that someone might do, because you're only spending 4 months there. But if your registrar can't deal with an emergency case overnight, perhaps, or out of hours, it's you that will be called, right? So it does make a tangible difference to you and the service. And I think if we think about most specialties, most higher surgical specialties, it takes people 2 years of foundation, 2 years of core training. They'll be in their fifth or sixth postgraduate year at the very least before the system starts to actually invest properly in them as a trainee. And that just to me seems very, very late compared to other, if you look at residency programs in other countries. I know we harp on about the US a lot, but even my colleagues from Portugal, Germany, Cuba, etc., that have come over to the UK. I was at dinner literally earlier this week with a load of urologists from different countries. So we had like a urology consultant from Canada, one from America, one from Switzerland, one lots of different places. And when I explained how the UK training system works, they were like appalled. They were, why do you do it like this? Why? And they recognize this issue immediately. Well, who is actually training you? Who is investing in your training? If you're not a resident for like 5 years, what are you doing?
So I suppose the question is, okay, let's think if we're going to fix the system. So what are people doing in those first 5 years?
Well, the first 2 years you are running the wards, really, aren't you? You are, and I know it's a bit of a toxic phrase, but you are service provision. The point of you being there is to ensure patient flow and to keep people alive and get a taster for the basics of medicine in hours and out of hours. But you're developing broad-based skills. You're not developing specialty specific skills. And we do that for 2 years.
Who does?
Oh.
Sorry to jump in, Ollie. Who does this elsewhere? So the countries where people very early on, much earlier, sort of get into training. Who does those things elsewhere?
Who does the sort of run through into specialty?
Well, who
Oh,
looks after the wards? Who chases results? Who does the
yeah,
sort of all of those things that we sort of say in the service provision that a typical F2 or ST1 would
yeah.
do. Yeah. So if we're going to say, okay, let's take those people out of that, who does it elsewhere?
Cool. So in Canada, for example, I believe the answer to that is, and I think this is the answer, to be honest, in most countries, is that the residents do it. But the thing that comes with that is they work double or triple the hours. That's the major.
Yeah.
So either I think you work many, many more hours, and you might have more residents, you need more feet on the ground, but they're all there all the time, how it used to be in the UK. Or the answer is that you use other health practitioners. So in America, for example, that would be PAs, physician assistants, as they are there, physician associates in the UK, advanced nurse practitioners. You split a lot of that responsibility with other health groups. Obviously, what we miss in the UK, or what we don't do, is we don't do the hours that those systems do. That's the major difference. Our training is much longer as a result. But interestingly, it's much longer even controlling for the additional years of internship and things. So if you look to compare neurosurgery, for example, in the UK and the US, neurosurgery residency is 8 years in the US, despite the fact that they recruit straight into it. In the UK, it's 8 years after the foundation program, probably after another year of working as an SHO like I'm doing now, and then 2 or 3 fellowships at the end of that. to properly develop the skills that you should have developed as a trainee, but weren't able to because there wasn't the capacity. So we have a very extended system.
I hope you're enjoying the show. Please click subscribe so you'll be notified when new episodes become available. This podcast is part of my mission to help doctors create successful and meaningful careers. You can be part of that mission too by forwarding this show to one person who you think might benefit from listening. Thank you. Now on with the show. So again, I'm old enough to remember when European Working Time Directive came in,
Yeah.
And again, it's controversial opinion. I don't think it's been a success. Okay.
No, I don't either.
I mean, I'll tell you. I think it's misrepresented because again, if I think how I used to work, yes, when we used to do, you work Friday 9 till 5 or whatever, then you'd come in on Saturday 9 in the morning, and you would work until Monday at 5 o'clock. Yeah, so sort of long shift. But the thing is, you weren't awake all of that time, yeah? At least not in ENT, yeah? People expected that you would be asleep. People wouldn't dream of phoning the ENT SHO sort of on a Saturday after 10 o'clock at night, sort of you'd go round at 10 o'clock, the nurses would put all the charts and you would go round and you'd do all the charts, prescribe all the fluids for the night and everything. And, nobody would phone you at 2 o'clock in the morning to prescribe paracetamol or rewrite a drug chart, whatever it would be. A&E used to pack noses and put people in a bed, and the A&E SHO was your mate, and they phone you at 7 in the morning and kind of say, look, I saw such and such at 1 o'clock in the morning. I put a pack in the nose. They're perfectly stable. I didn't phone you because nothing needed to be done. Likewise, with tonsillitis, they say, I admitted an 18-year-old fit and healthy. I put up a bag of fluids. I've given them some antibiotics. I didn't phone you at 1 o'clock in the morning because you didn't do anything. But can you just see them on the ward round? And then you'd go round at 8 o'clock. Yeah. So yes, we work long hours, but we were asleep. Yeah. You had another call room, and okay, if there was a big emergency, then yes, you got called, and that's why it was called on call. Yeah, you were on call. You got called if there was an emergency, not to do routine stuff. And the other thing, again, if I think for me going back to the house job, which was really long hours and really hard work, I think for me the major thing there was you had hospital accommodation, so literally you lived on site, you went in and then you went to bed, and you went in and went to bed. So yes, you did long hours, but you just lived in hospital for a year. People accepted that was going to be a year because you were a house officer, and it was going to be incredibly hard work for 1 year when you were 23. Yeah, so at the age of 24 or 23, you worked really, really hard for 1 year and basically lived in hospital for 1 year. And at the end of that 1 year, you became SHO and you were God. Yeah. The SHO was God. So we've shifted that one really, really intensive hard year when you just lived and worked in hospital. We've lost that. And we've replaced it with this years and years and years long thing where people rotate, nobody has any ownership. And actually, that's kind of why for me, at least in ENT, I can't talk for other specialties, but for ENT, it's been a disaster, because instead of having one really, really intense year, and then you became the ENT SHO and you were God as the SHO, there's kind of now this expanded thing that carries on until you're 40 and you sort of
still exactly
etc. Give me some examples where you or other people that have been really well supported by senior doctors.
Yeah, so there is one, I think I can say the department because it's a really positive thing to say. It's just an observation. I did my foundation jobs up in the Northeast, and one of my SHOs, my F2 rotations, I did with the neurology department at the Royal Victoria Infirmary in Newcastle, their big sort of city centre hospital. And we were warned before going there that it was a bit of an old school department, and it was, and it is. And I think what that meant practically, the way I was warned is it's a bit old school, like no scrubs allowed on the ward, have to wear smart clothes, like business wear, whatever. And went in and I thought, all right, fair enough, whatever. I tended to wear smart clothes anyway, so this wasn't a concern, but went in, and what you quickly realized, or I realized as someone who's very interested in medical education and training, is that it was quite strict as an environment. So expectations, were set by the consultant and they were high, and you should examine all of your own patients and, come up with the plans and things. You shouldn't just be following a ward round and scribing as a dog's body. You were there to be a doctor. But what that department did so well was their emphasis on training, and they recognized how important good training was, and that without that training, you weren't going to get good doctors. And the way they did that was they blocked out one of the afternoons in the week for a grand round, where all of the doctors and like the specialist nursing staff and the groups that were going to come and discuss these cases would sit in a lecture theatre and they would present cases, for 1 or 2 hours. And we as the SHOs would sit at the front. And so we'd be first in the firing line for any questions, what do you think about this scan, whatever. And then when we weren't able to answer, it would go to the registrars who were next, and then the consultants at the back as it got more and more difficult. And similar with protected SHO teaching I think it was on a Friday or something, where the consultant would sit with us for an hour and go through something. But the point was with this that it was so fiercely protected from like service demand, if you like, where if I was called during the grand round or during this protected teaching, the consultant would take the phone from me and say, no, they are in training, and that this is important for their training, and would deal with it. And I've never worked anywhere else like that, where it was so the idea of training was so vigorously protected by the consultant body, and they really stuck up for the doctors in that sense. Or if you were in theatre or whatever doing so they knew I was interested in neurosurgery, so they let me go and spend some time with the neurosurgeons, and again would be very clear, no, this is a training exercise. He is there to be trained. He should not be called back to the ward, because as early careers doctors, we have no gravitas. Obviously, we are no one in the grand scheme of things, especially in an established department. If the ward sister that's been there for 10 years tells me to do something and I don't do it, as the SHO that's been there for 2 months, I have no agency. I have no power, as it were. I can't stand up for myself. We rely on our senior doctors as the grown-up version of our profession to stand up for us and our training. And I remember that really vividly.
So there's something there about culture, but also, I'm going to say, departmental leadership.
Yeah.
Because again, if I turn that round, kind of what happens at consultant level, people say you need to do more clinics. When you need to reduce doctors' hours, you need to put more clinics, you need to put on extra theatre sessions, and then instead of the departmental leader, whoever that happens to be, pushing back and sort of saying, no, Wednesday afternoon we do not do any clinical work. The whole department stops every Wednesday afternoon, and every Wednesday afternoon we have training, or once a week on Friday for an hour, whatever that might be. Is that somewhere in the far distant past, most departmental heads will have had, oh yeah, let's scrap that. And again, I remember the days when nobody was clinical on Friday afternoons. Yeah, that used to be perfectly normal. No department was ever clinical on a Friday afternoon, and Friday afternoon every week always was educational activities.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the lines that our previous leaders would have said, okay, well, we now need to work Friday afternoons. And somewhere along the line, sort of the Wednesday lunchtime or whatever it went. And then somewhere along the line, the rota coordinators then thought it's perfectly okay to schedule people to be on call. Like for us, this happens with GP trainees often, because I think trainees where we are, they've got a weekly half-day release scheme. But somewhere along the line, rota coordinators thought it's perfectly okay to schedule those people to be clinical which is the rota coordinator's job. But I guess there was a failure in medical leadership there, because,
Yeah.
whoever's in charge of the department doesn't push back and kind of say, no, this is not acceptable.
I think we're going to have these battles of accountability, and this actually is my, I think, my great failure, perhaps, as an early careers doctor, to understand this. And it's only as I've become more involved with groups like the BMA and starting to speak to people who work at the Royal Colleges and in government. And I think we certainly, as a medical student, even now as a foundation, an early careers doctor, you see your consultant as God, don't you, in that sense that you've described. And my consultant knows everything about everything, and what they say happens, and everyone respects them and everyone looks up to them, and they're seen as the great, the people who know what's going on and can affect change. So in the example we just talked about, if Matt Daniel says, no, Friday afternoons are for training, because if we don't do training, then our doctors are going to be worse and patients are not going to be better served. This is not acceptable from a professional standpoint, and we need to do the training. But whoever sits above you presumably then turns around and says, well, tough.
Yeah.
We have more patients and we need to run another list on Friday afternoon or whatever. And I think what I have always failed to understand is what happens at this interface, because now, let's say now all of the consultants, not just you, but all of the consultants say, this is extremely important. We need this training. If it doesn't happen, patients are going to suffer. Can you please sign in an email that you are okay with training not happening and doctors getting worse and patients not receiving proper care because our doctors won't be as skilled? What actually happens in these kinds of discussions? Because this is where, to me, accountability seems to somewhat fail, because that decision to remove that training isn't ever attached to anyone. No one actually takes responsibility for it. That person above you, it just sort of disappears into the web of the NHS. Where does responsibility lie?
I think that the problem there that you've outlined again is for me is how our profession is led. Yeah, so who are our leaders? Because my guess would be that if you talk with that Friday afternoons, there probably were a bunch of consultants that shouted and sort of says this is not acceptable, we can't do it, and they were overruled. Same as, I don't know what happens in general practice, but again, when I was a student, general practice, Wednesday afternoons, all general practices used to close. Yeah. And I remember as an undergraduate doing my GP attachment, and my GP took me cycling on the Wednesday afternoon and he said, bring your bike. Have you got a bike? And I can't say I've got a bike. I said, bring your bike on Wednesday. And I kind of like, why am I bringing my bike on Wednesday to a GP attachment as an undergraduate student? Yeah. And he said, because, this is what we do in general practice on a Wednesday afternoon, we go cycling. And I went cycling with my GP, yeah, because they closed. Yeah. And I kind of thought, okay, I mean, I might want to do general practice if this is what I do. So I think somewhere along the line, people did stand up and they were overruled and opted out. Yeah. And the people that made it happen were the people that progressed their medical career. Yeah. Because, the medical leader, the people that implemented those things progressed. And the more they implemented unpopular short-term decisions, the more they progressed. And I think that's not just medicine. That's what happens everywhere in the world, isn't it? People get rewarded for doing the bidding of the person above, not necessarily what needs to be done. And medicine's no different there. I guess sort of the part of the challenge there again, if I think of that Friday afternoon is the fact that people simply opt out. Yeah. And maybe as senior doctors, one might sort of say that that just isn't acceptable. Yeah. If something's right, you need to keep pushing at it. But then people burn out. You push, and 10 years later you kind of give up. I think it's also for me, in that example we're talking about Friday afternoons. I think it's it it lacks, the solution lacks imagination. Yeah, because for me, I'd kind of think, okay, theatre's empty on a Friday afternoon, so how about ENT operates on a Friday afternoon, but not on a Tuesday afternoon, and but on a Tuesday afternoon, all of our theatres go to neurosurgery, and neurosurgery takes ENT theatres on a Tuesday afternoon, and neurosurgery has Wednesday afternoon. And on a Wednesday afternoon, neurosurgery is off, but that means pediatric surgery sort of operates in neurosurgery. So theatre still gets used all the time. Clinics still get used all the time. Yeah, because I can see why a theatre's empty. It's a waste of resources. I can see.
Yeah, you should be using it.
But an imaginative solution is a system-wide solution where people sort of say, well, okay, ENT is not using their theatre on a Friday afternoon. Let's give it to neurosurgery. Neurosurgery is not using their theatre on a Tuesday afternoon. Let's give it to pediatric surgery. Yeah, that for me would be an imaginative system-wide solution. So,
but that is why I think, and perhaps to round off an idea, that this idea of clinical leadership, you need people who can imagine things like that. You need people who understand how clinical resources are distributed in order to come up with these solutions. And as someone who I'm about to do this year-long leadership fellow scheme, I think that is the value in clinical leaders, and having doctors, just for, speaking from my own perspective, we need doctors who are leadership trained, who are able to think like this and implement solutions. And that's maybe what we've lacked, historically, maybe. And we just relied on the gravitas of the consultant as a body, as an entity to enact change. They are the consultant, and what they say goes. But maybe we need more than that now.
And we need people, people from your generation who understand leadership, who understand influences, who understand systems, who understand negotiation. And historically, maybe that's what we didn't have. We didn't have who understood leadership in its broadest context. So I'll bring us to a close, Ollie, and maybe if I could ask you to summarize, what would be your top tips for doctors at work?
Doctors at work, I think the most important thing, and the thing I try to remember every day, is that we're going in to help patients, and whatever stresses we do or don't have, some of the most satisfying experiences I've had at work have been able to still go the extra mile for a patient and get a really good outcome, even when things are very stressful and very bad. And although it felt horrible at the time, those are some of the most satisfying encounters I've ever had. Being honest and open with those that supervise you, and asking for help when you need it, and talking about the stuff that we've talked about today, and saying, I don't think something is right, or I think this is a problem, or I need your help with this. And a lot of the time you'll be ignored and you won't be helped. But if you don't at least try, then you can't say that you've done right in those situations. But actually, the third thing, and it's perhaps a tangent, is to value yourself. And this applies more generally, I think, if you are being used and abused at work, do not sacrifice yourself for the well-being of the system. You should try not to burn your candle at both ends, I suppose, just to keep the machinery running. The machine needs to survive by itself without you throwing yourself into it. And if you're not satisfied, and if you're not being looked after properly, then you have to be prepared to leave, because otherwise nothing will change.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ollie.
All right, thank you, Matt. It's been lovely to chat to you.